everybody, welcome. Thank you for coming along. So I'm Linzi Kemp. I am a chronic pain and illness coach, and I work with chronic pain and different symptoms of chronic illness very much from really an emotional perspective. I work with it from the point of view that it's our emotions and thoughts that actually manifest as these symptoms. And I'm sure I'm gonna talk quite a lot more about that throughout the next few minutes. I'm also a monk, an Ishaya monk, which kind of actually still sounds a bit weird to me if I'm honest. And that is me getting involved with that, and my exploration of consciousness is all part of the story. So I'm sure more will come up about that. And please do feel free. I've just checked that we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end if anyone wants to ask me anything. Do we have people in the room that have been diagnosed with the condition fibromyalgia? Yeah, sure. And anyone who believes they're experiencing the symptoms but not diagnosed yet? Yeah. And as well for chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, anyone else experiencing any of those symptoms? Okay.
I've stayed because my sister's just been diagnosed with polymyalgia rheumatica, so I've stayed to listen and see if I can pass some information on.
Cool. I'm glad you brought that up actually as another potential kind of diagnosis for very similar symptoms, I suspect as well. So it might be interesting for you to sort of hear where the connection might be. Yeah. So fibromyalgia is a chronic condition that I recently read is estimated to affect something like 6% of the worldwide population now. On the Isle of Man, I believe there's around about 300 people registered with the charity ME support. Is there anyone who's connected with ME support in the room? No. I just thought you might, if there is anyone that actually knows the updated figure, because it's quite old, but it was about 300 people. Welcome.
Sorry, it's okay. Just a bit of a rush.
Oh yeah, as long as you share. And so, yeah, the latest figure I had is about 300 people. Under that heading of ME Support, which is the charity that's here on the island, that includes people with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, it includes people with a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, and it also includes people with a diagnosis of ME. At least some of you will be aware of how much those illnesses actually cross over. And what a variety of symptoms that can be presented by chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And it can vary from person to person, but certainly the most prominent and consistent symptoms of the illness are extreme fatigue, and with fibromyalgia, always physical pain really. There are a few other symptoms. Can you guys help me out, anyone who's experiencing them? Can you just shout out a few things that you're experiencing with your illness?
Sleep.
A lack of
Sleep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so forgetfulness. Yeah, lack of concentration.
You have nausea, don't you? Quite a lot of nausea.
Nausea as well, yeah. Yeah, which not everyone experiences, but some do. Yeah. Anything else?
IBS.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was a big one for me actually. Yeah. Headache.
Depression and anxiety, migraines.
Yeah. What did you say before the actual anxiety? Word anxiety?
Depression
And anxiety, yeah. Yeah, very good point. Is that everyone else's experience that's having the symptoms at the moment? Anxiety and depression as well? Yeah. It's if not, it is always, I'm going to say if not always, but I've yet to come across a case where the person's not experiencing anxiety and depression. It's certainly depression. Anxiety, varying levels, but certainly depression tends to be a consistent experience. It certainly was mine. And we've got some more coming in. Come on in, come on. This small group, this small intimate group is getting bigger and bigger, isn't it? No. I've just been, I'll let you sit down. That's all right. No, I'm glad you're here. I've just been asking if anyone's experiencing symptoms or being diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME.
I've got MS.
MS,
Yeah,
right?
which is similar.
Yeah.
So both pains and aches as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it, that these conditions are all very similar. You know, people I've worked with fibromyalgia will have the chronic fatigue, and then the people with the chronic fatigue syndrome will also have the pain, even though, you know, there's a crossover really. There are methods now that they use to diagnose fibromyalgia, different tests they do, like pressure points and things like that. That wasn't the case when I was diagnosed. So I was diagnosed 2009, I think. And it was after a long time. Well, it was 4 years actually. I say a long time, but I know that other people experience it for a lot longer actually before they actually get the diagnosis or get some help. But it felt like a long time. It was about 4 years of going back and forth to the doctor, just knowing something was wrong. If we go back to 2006, let's say my story begins in about 2006. At 25, I was extremely healthy, active young woman. I was a gym junkie. I walked everywhere because I didn't have a driving license at that point. I was very sporty. I was working my way up the corporate ladder, and I lived. You know, I worked and played hard, basically, and I just really took it for granted, like, you know, really like most young people do. However, by the time I was 29, I was bedbound. I was stuck in the house. My mum was nursing me. And this was the period in which the illness, the symptoms started to take hold and just get progressively worse. So I initially started to notice just that kind of general lack of energy, really. It was like my energy levels were draining, where I used to not have to think about it. Now there was a point in the day where I was, you know, I was flagging more, and then I started to have a lot of viral conditions. That might be some of your experience as well. I became the girl that got everything. If there's something going around, I'll get it, you know. And this was progressive to the point where it felt like every couple of weeks I had like a flu-like flu, and that's also very much what it's like, isn't it? Really, to have any of those conditions that we've been talking about. And so it makes going to the gym 4 times a week and climbing up the corporate ladder pretty difficult when you feel like you've got a bad bout of flu every couple of weeks. And so I kind of battled on and tried my best to kind of hold my life together, how I'd created it. And I went to the doctor and I told them there was something wrong, and they'd do the blood test and they'd say there's nothing wrong, and then I'd go to the doctor and they'd do the blood test and they'd say there's nothing wrong, and it just went on and on and on. Yeah, you definitely know what I'm talking about here, right? And I knew no one else certainly that had talked about having these symptoms to me. So I really felt very isolated. I felt like it was just me. I had no awareness of alternative therapies or anything like that at all, honestly. Like, I'd never ever entered my world. And so at that point, as far as I was concerned, you know, well, I was completely stuck, you know. If the doctor's telling me there's nothing wrong, then there's nothing wrong. And I know this is a really common shared experience, that then you start to believe that it is you, and somehow you're making this up, because no one believes you, right? Or can at least understand or give you any answers, and certainly no solutions to what you're experiencing. So it becomes a very, very isolated place to be. You feel incredibly misunderstood. You just want to be well, but you're not even sure if you're not well in the first place, because there's no one confirming it, right? And then, of course, as with the rest of life, your social life is affected, because, for all of us, if we've got the flu, we're not very likely to go out drinking with our mates or go to a festival or whatever. And so, of course, again, a really, really common experience is that your friends keep asking you to do stuff, maybe 2 or 3 times, and when you keep saying no long enough, well, they don't bother anymore, right? Yeah. And so it becomes a very lonely place. And what eventually happened to me up until that point, around when I got the diagnosis, was that I'd lost my job. I had to move out of my house. I had to get rid of my dog. I had a huge Akita called Kaya, and I just couldn't look after her anymore, because I couldn't even take her out walking, So she went, and the house went, the job went, the car went, and the mum moved back in. To my mind at that time, this was the nightmare experience of my life, I'd completely lost all control. Completely. I was completely dependent on my mum again at 29, 30 years old. And I had literally no hope in this moment. This capsule of time within this story, there was no hope. At this point, I'd been given a diagnosis by the doctor of fibromyalgia, told that I would probably have to just deal with it for the rest of my life. I was fortunate in that I had a doctor that was cool enough to suggest that I do go out and look for alternative ways to at least improve my overall well-being. He did recognise that this wasn't just a physical thing, and so he encouraged me to do anything that was going to improve my stress levels and all that kind of stuff. But from a point of view of whether I was going to always now, by this point, a couple of weeks after the diagnosis, I just really, really crashed, and that's when everything went. And it was a black hole. It was a black hole. And I was completely desperate. Now, I had been experiencing depression anyway. I had not... It had been coming. I'd experienced depression as a child. In my teenage life, I experienced depression. I became agoraphobic when I was about 14, and so I finished my GCSEs at home because I wouldn't leave the house. I'd had some, I think there's a psychologist that used to come and see me, who eventually got me out of the house, and I did start to live an independent life again when I was about 16. And I think I probably, in reality, I'd lived with a kind of, I was going to say subtle, but I don't think it was that subtle really. I just got used to it. I'd lived with depression really for a long time, I just didn't recognise it as that. And I didn't know any different, because really that had been quite a consistent experience all my life, really, whatever was going on. I don't think I didn't really remember an experience without depression. But so then with this, the isolation and feeling like my world was falling to pieces, that got a lot worse. And so I became suicidal. And there were a handful of times probably that I was at the point where I was really thinking about how this was going to happen, for me, the drive for the suicide was hopelessness. Ultimately, that's where we're at, isn't it? When we're suicidal, we're hopeless, and that's why there's no hope. So that's how we end up there, right? And I used to call my mum, and she'd come around with a bottle of wine, make sure I was drunk enough to pass out, put me in bed, and then she'd leave me because she knew I'd be okay. So they were the best days. And there was this afternoon where all this had happened. Everything, I realised everything was going. I was about to move out of my house, the job had gone and all that. And to me it was everything, it was my world, it was my control, it was my future, it was my livelihood, it was everything that had gone. And the emotional pain was so overwhelming that again I was starting to go to that place where there's only one way that I know right now to get away from this emotional pain. There's only one way. But for the first time, instead of calling my mum and saying, "You better bring the wine," I found myself doing this. Looking up to the sky, hands in prayer position, saying, "Please help me." And I was so surprised I'd done it. I had no idea who I was talking to. But it was a very instinctive, intuitive thing that I did. And even in the moment that I'd done it, things were better already. I didn't understand why at the time, but I guess now looking back, I realised what I did was I surrendered to something bigger than myself in that moment. I gave up control and I actually asked for help, which the ego cannot do. It doesn't ask for help. It's not that part of us that does that. And I guess I'd just been living from that egoic space for a long, long time because I didn't know any different. And then magically, what preceded this was very quickly all these people started rushing into my life who were from this completely other world that I'd never had anything to do with really. And so they were therapists and there were mediums and there were all these people that were just really cool, and it was a very magical time. There was a lot of magic, and I started to experience a world that I'd just been blinkered from because I'd been in the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 thing, And one of the people I met was doing a therapy call for me at the time. We were using EFT. Some of you might be familiar with that tapping technique. No.
What is it? EFT?
Emotional freedom techniques was that was my first introduction to alternative therapies, really. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And what became very apparent very quickly was that we were working with my past experiences. We were working with traumas that I'd experienced. We were working with my relationship with myself, which was horrendous, and I had never realised how horrendous it was, but it really wasn't great, And as we had these sessions and we worked on this stuff, it was very obvious that there was a physical impact on me. Sometimes it was really quite startlingly apparent, that I couldn't walk at the beginning of the session and then I'd be walking up the stairs afterwards. Or
did you find it painful, emotionally painful to go through that?
It was less painful than having held on to it.
Oh, right.
Although again, I hadn't realised that at the time before, but once I knew that there was once I had the contrast of a different experience, I have actually found really every aspect of the journey with the healing just liberating, really. And yeah, there's been tears, you know, and there's been anger. My word, a lot of anger. But a freedom in just allowing that to move, really. And that's a big part of the work that I do. I put a huge emphasis on allowing our feelings in the movement, because really that's what allows it to go, you know. When we are holding on to our pain, and we don't do that consciously, you know, it's subconscious and it's just to survive. We have like an automatic survival mechanism that we start really young in life to suppress emotions in order for us to deal with the situation that we're in at the time. So if little John, if little John, his little bunny rabbit dies when he's 5 years old, and that little bunny rabbit, Flopsy, was his best friend, to little John, that's a massive thing to happen. It could be his first experience of loss. And at that age, it might be that he's just not able to process that. He's just not able to actually deal with that. And so what happens essentially is we have an automatic response from our brain, which we're not even aware of. We're not involved in that. It just happens, that decides in a nanosecond or less that right now this little boy can't deal with this loss. He can't process it. He couldn't handle the feelings that are so, because of the intensity of it. We're going to store this for later. It's almost like we'll store it for later until he's ready to deal with it. And so it's basically thrown in like an invisible backpack on our backs.
Like filed.
Yeah, or filed, like a big filing cabinet.
Yeah.
Even heavier and harder to drag around. Yeah. And this carries on and on throughout our lives, and we all know, don't we? You know, we have experiences that are good, bad, and different, and there are experiences where we have that suppressing, or we repress. We'd say repress, where we actually make that decision, you know, and that decision to not feel this right now. We're very conscious that we're doing that. But again, that in itself is based on the old programming and the idea of, you know, what I can deal with and what the story actually is around what's happening. That's why we don't just allow ourselves to just feel, to just feel whatever it is and just watch it, because we attach stories to what we're experiencing, and we have a preference, you know, as to what we want to feel. And if we don't want to feel it, we tend to resist it. And when we resist it, we just kind of squash it down and pretty much put it in the backpack. And then when we come to, we will only come to face that when we're ready to come to face that. And so we go through life running these survival programs, and something that I do with people is that I really work with just helping them to just allow themselves to feel that thing that they've been avoiding feeling, basically. An emotion, apparently, and I haven't timed this exactly, but thereabouts, an emotion lasts maximum 90 seconds if we just allow it to be there. If we just watch it, if we're just okay with it, we don't judge it, we don't label it, we don't even call it sad or guilt or anger or happiness, or we don't give it a label, and we just allow it to be there, it'll just move on through. Because it turns out, in my experience, that that's all it actually wants to do. But we've got a backpack full of it. And you can imagine that if you spent your entire life really never dealing with that guilt, I don't want to see that guilt ever, we need someone to help us. We need someone to sit down in front of us and think, okay, it's okay, this is okay. This is really okay. Being okay with our feelings is, it can take a lot of practice. I feel like I better get back on track, haven't I, with my story really. So, and so although what I'm talking about there is what I have essentially discovered. What I realised was that, which was mind-blowing to me at the time, because I had no idea. I had literally no idea that I didn't know anything about my emotions. I just ignored them really. And when I realised that when we work on the emotional stuff, of which there was so much more than I'd ever realised, then the impact is the physical stuff goes away. This is amazing. Like, to me, that was absolutely mind-blowing, amazing, and ever since I've been very, very, very passionate about it. And so I've, over the last 8-ish years, I've just worked with it, I've studied it, and I've got better and better. What happened for me was that I got to a place with my illness that I was better. I was independent again. I was managing to live a life, but I was limited still, you know? It was like there was always just like a ball and chain on my ankles. I was just dragging this thing along. And so I just kind of carried on with this passion to get well. And it's led me to all sorts of places really. And what are we like for time?
We are half past.
Great.
Halfway.
Yeah, okay. What I started to realise when I saw that, when I release this pain, this physical pain goes. When I accept this is where I'm at with this illness, and actually this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, from a point of view of, I thought that my life was about my house and my car and my job, really. But I realised that there was just more to life, and that was really quickly apparent to me. What it started to appear like, more than at first I was this victim to this illness that was slowing me down and holding me back. It started to appear like this might actually be happening for me rather than to me. This is taking me somewhere else, and it was way more exciting for me to go down that other path. And sleeping, was it you was talking about sleep deprivation? Really common and really annoying to people who've got fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, or the other things, the polymyalgia. really, really, really annoying to them is people say, oh, you're tired so you're asleep all the time. And you're like, oh my God, I wish I slept all the time. Because it's really common and a big aspect of the symptoms, right? And the symptoms are, they're stress. In essence, it's stress. It's the stress that we're experiencing that is showing up as the physical symptoms. So, fibromyalgia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone with fibromyalgia has a lot of stress. And it's not surprising you don't sleep very well, if at all. I didn't for like 10 years. I'd actually had the insomnia for a long time. And I was on not painkillers, well I was on painkillers, but I was on some sleeping tablets. And I knew a few people who did a meditation technique called Ascension. And I'd heard that it could help with my sleep. So I went along just for that. And now I'm a monk. So I I went along to find something to calm my mind. I'd tried all these other techniques, and nothing really did anything for me. You know, I kind of got a little bit of peace at the time, and then it didn't spill out into my life though. And then I found this technique that did, and absolutely blew me away very quickly. Actually, talking about the contrasting experiences from, you know, the depression to releasing that stuff to feel better. It was the same kind of thing really with Ascension. Very quickly for me allowed me to experience what it's really like to really, really, really be here. To really, really, really be here right now. Completely here. And in that experience, none of that exists anyway. That's my experience. And so I got hooked on that as well. And proceeded to go out to Spain and take vows, and it's just a little aspect of the whole story really. What it allows me to do now from a point of view of my work is to approach my work from that space of really being here now, so that I can be super clear for the person that's sitting in front of me, because that's the thing, you know. All the patterns are subconscious, you know, the holding of the emotions. I've had memories come up over the past few years, really like big stuff that I honestly, when it came up, I honestly didn't know that had happened to me, you know. That's how powerful that can be, you know, that we can literally put it so far down the bottom of the backpack that we even forget it's happened, and that can be massive stuff. It normally is massive stuff actually. It's the biggest stuff that we really, 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 really find painful that we put so far away. And so yeah, that's what I do, and what's clarified my actual work with pain and illness over the last few years is that, remember, we were still with the ball and chain, right? And then I went on a little adventure. I went to Spain and became a monk, and went to live in England with my Spanish boyfriend, and just had a bit of an adventure with my little ball and chain kind of tagged to me. And then I moved back to the Isle of Man about 3 years ago, and I had a miscarriage. And when I had the miscarriage, I had a big crash. It was the first time I had a really big crash for a while. But it was massive. It was like pretty much back to where I'd been, you know, like all those years before. This time with my partner looking after me. And there was a lady that I'd met along my way who was also an Ashayan monk called Ruda Devi. And she was helping people with fibromyalgia. She had all these testimonials from people with specifically fibromyalgia. It's the only thing she was working with at the time. Of people who had not only got well, but they were like totally over this illness, and they were really having a much greater life experience than they'd ever had before as well. And I knew very instinctively, intuitively, this was the final thing for me that I needed to do. You know, like I had the knowledge, I knew the triggers for the different symptoms. I'd seen loads of my stuff, I'd let all this stuff go, and I felt like I'd kind of like, you know, like that onion thing, you know, the onion layers, peeling them away, yeah. And it was an eternal onion. And I just knew that this, I had to do this. And so I worked with her on a program for 12 weeks. And within like half the time, literally, guys, like I felt like I'd just woken from the grave. It was unbelievable. It's like, I'd been drowning, and I could breathe again. And it was really amazing. And really the difference between what I'd done before and what she did with me was that she also definitely came from that space, and I think it's really important, like for me anyway, certainly. She came from that space of totally holding me actually to heal myself, she used a collection of various techniques, which essentially were all for me to use. We had a coaching session every week where we talked about what was up, and we worked with it. But the big difference that she came with was that rather than working with this trauma and this like experience and this way I feel about myself and kind of fragmented, which is what I'd done before and it helped me a lot. But I knew I wasn't getting to the core, like I wasn't getting to the centre of the onion, I hadn't found that yet. But what she did was she kind of worked from that, rather than coming from the outside and peeling the layers of the onion off to get into the middle, she went straight to the middle and then she just like let me dissolve the onion.
How did
That
she do
makes
that?
sense. Well, she'd worked with people with fibromyalgia for a long time. She'd worked with people with all sorts of chronic pain for some time, and through her experience and then inspired by people with fibromyalgia actually, she developed a specific program for them. She recognised the pattern, she recognised the traits in the people that had the condition, and she worked at looking at the actual root cause of the issue with the person. So that's how I work now. So
What's her name, sorry?
say again, sorry.
What's her name?
Rudra Devi.
Rudra Devi.
Rudra Devi is her Sanskrit name.
Okay.
So it's Ruda, separate word Devi.
Devi.
Devi, yeah.
How did she help the person to recognise what the root was?
Yeah. So this is, I trained with her. So this is what I do now. I work in a slightly different way to her, because I've bespoken it and made it a bit more accessible, I feel anyway. In an initial session with me, I will look at, so if you were to come for a session with me, for example, I would need to know what was going on with you beforehand. And then in the first session, which would be normally about an hour and 15 minutes, the first session with me, I will be looking for your root triggers, okay? I never look at illness. I'll want to know your symptoms because it's my guide to look to see what to look at for you. But I don't work with removing symptoms. I work with removing the cause of the symptoms. So everything has cause and effect, right? Like if I eat 10 Mars bars a day, I'm probably going to put on weight. Yeah. Or donuts, get hungry. So in that scenario, if we eat 10 Mars bars a day, we put on weight, the Mars bars, the weight gain is the cause, right? Sorry, the effect, and the cause is the eating the Mars bars.
Yeah.
We stop eating the Mars bars, and hopefully, the weight will fall off.
Yeah.
And so it's the same kind of principle. I am looking for the root cause of your symptoms. When I work with you, and in the same way that Rudy Davy does, I am looking for that and removing that cause. Only the cause. Because it's when we remove the cause, which is suppressed emotions, mental programming. I work with rewriting mental programming as well. So self-defeating beliefs about ourselves, about the world around us. I just work with that. I just work with that stuff with you, and removing that. So we find out what the root is, and then we remove it, and ultimately then the symptoms dissolve. That's how it works.
Makes sense.
Yeah, seems to work.
Does it? That's what I was going to ask you. Have you had much success with it?
Yeah, so Ruja Devi has a lot of experience herself with fibro. As I say, she was only working with fibromyalgia clients at the time, and she has an extremely high success rate. I tell you why I've changed. One of the reasons I've made slight tweaks to the way that she was working at the time is because she'd normally work with people for 12 weeks, and with someone with fibromyalgia, ME, something like that, if I was going to work with them to actually like get over the illness, I'd want to work with you for at least 12 weeks as well. What I recognise is that because of the type of work this is, you can get over the illness in that time. And if you continue to maintain what you've learned, because what I teach is how to feel those feelings, how to allow them, I help you to recognise your programs and the patterns that are keeping you in the suffering, emotionally and ultimately in the physical suffering. And any techniques that I teach throughout the program, or like the weeks that we work together, any of those you're going to have those to apply moving forward, because I do a coaching session and then you guys go away and you do the bits in between the sessions, and so I would want to work with someone for that little of time to get them well, and that's what happens. What I recognise it's important is that to recognise if 12 weeks is the right length of time for someone, it could be a bit longer. And also, it's really, really powerful to still keep having regular sessions, not necessarily weekly. But what I've recognised is that with this work, it's a bit like anything really. It's like similar to if you went on a 6-week meditation course and you were going every week, and you were, like when you were inspired at the beginning, and so you were doing it every night because you were like really into this meditation course, and because you're going every week, you've got the group and you've got the accountability and you're doing it, and then the classes stop. I mean, there must be people in the room that have experienced that sort of thing, or Slimming World or whatever it is. And then the classes stop, and then you start to just kind of, you don't do so much, you don't give it so much attention, and you might get into old habits. So you get into old habits of not doing your meditation, or you get into old habits of eating chocolate cake or whatever.
Go back to the way you were before.
Yeah, so I think it's not that, I don't think that you could revert completely back, but what's really important and that I like to offer is a regular, once we get to a certain point, then a regular session like once a month or whatever, depending on that person, to keep the support, keep the support and keep the awareness, because for all of us, we can always slip back into old patterns. But the other thing is as well that what a client of mine should leave with is that education. So you recognise now, that, like I certainly do, if there's a physical symptom that comes up, I know it's something emotional for me. And so if you're now aware of your patterns, you're aware of maybe you know what to look out for. Maybe I'm beating myself up, or I'm actually, I've been feeling really grumpy all day. I'm probably feeling quite angry. I need to just kind of do what Linzi said and allow this to move so that I can feel better or whatever, And so yeah, I'm about that too, because that's my main passion really. My main actual passion is for people to recognise that link, and so not only can we heal, but actually we can actually grow as people. We can let go of what's holding us back, what's making us feel depressed and anxious, and live a much happier, more fulfilling life, and quite possibly one that resonates much more with who we are, which has ultimately been my experience through the illness. Yeah. And it goes for anyone, I'm talking about fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, but it goes, this principle goes for anyone who's got headaches, anyone who's got a bad back. I work with people with bad backs, migraines, dodgy knees, all that sort of stuff. You can work with it all from an emotional perspective, and what's really cool is if we do that, then we get to see this, where we can let go, to be happier, basically, So it's looking at illness and life in general, really suffering, as an invitation to see, to become consciously aware of what's happening, and to do what we need to do to let that go, so that we can experience greater happiness.
Just over 10 minutes now.
Okay, great. Yes, I guess that's ultimately the thing, really, you know. That's what essentially I've learned, and been the big difference, the big difference in whether I was going to continue to suffer from a chronic condition and just suffer from it, and hold on to this idea of a life that I could have had, that I was having before, or whether I turned that around to realise actually that this was taking me a different direction, and to recognise that my body wasn't malfunctioning, you know. I don't really, honestly, personally believe it makes mistakes. I think there's always a good reason for that. And I've taken the guidance from it, really, and as I say, that's what I help other people to do, because I really believe for all of us, actually, any experience of any kind of suffering, really, is actually an invitation to go beyond and see what else is possible for us in our life experience.
So you can say that you feel cured, you've got rid of your ball and chain.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing actually, because that's like 3 years ago now.
Mm.
Yeah, very quickly. By going into that, really working to the heart of the matter, you know, that going from the centre of the onion and dissolving it, as I said, rather than and all of that serves, you know. Like every part of that experience for me is what brought me to where I am now, got me well, got me on a path that felt much more in line with who I am. But yeah, ultimately that was the thing, to get to the core of it. Yeah. Has anyone else got any questions?
Do you think the core of it essentially is the same thing in everyone?
There are certain traits for sure that are common with people with these conditions. People with fibromyalgia always count themselves last. They believe that everyone else's needs are more important than their own. They will normally feel that they were overlooked as a child as well.
She says she's the favourite.
There'll be an aspect, this is my experience, and there'll be an aspect of feeling in some way overlooked, and essentially that's where I'm not as important as everyone else comes in. They're also hellishly creative and normally suppressing it, sometimes not, but certainly either suppressing it or feeling it's being suppressed. Yeah.
Do you find that the people you work with, do you find you have more success with older people compared to younger people? I mean, I'm coming in from a parent's point of view. I'm trying to get my young daughter to look into alternative ways instead of just popping pills that everyone's given her. And it's trying to get her to be open-minded enough to consider those sort of things, because I figure sometimes we only start helping ourselves as we mature and get older, whereas when you're younger, you're more frustrated and angry at the whole world and you just want somebody to fix you rather than looking at trying to fix yourself. So I'm wondering whether you have as much success with the younger generation as you would the older.
It's easier.
They're not set in their ways, I suppose. The younger ones.
Yeah, generally that's the experience, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think that it's more common, isn't it, for us in later life to start to go inward and start to look for alternative ways or maybe a different perspective. But if that comes along at 16 or whatever, then great. You know, you know, you're here now, aren't you? So it's showing up for you right now, whatever you choose to do. To lend that perspective and your possibilities that are available to you as soon as possible is great. And yeah, it's that really. It seems to be the stuck in the ways, you know. The older that we get, you know, the more we've just ingrained those patterns. Not meaning that it's difficult, because actually it's not. I mean, it's actually really simple to reprogram stuff and to let stuff go. It's insanely simple actually, which is part of why we need help, because we complicate it with our own stories and ideas about ourselves. But yeah, generally, just like the younger we are, the more open we tend to be, so it's more simple, really. Yeah.
I think it's resonating a little bit because we went to somebody last week and she did some tapping therapy, and what came out of that was a lot of emotions that I didn't realise Lauren had, and she came out of it feeling like she wasn't carrying as much emotion about the situation, and now what you're saying sort of links into that. So she's sat here nodding, and I'm like, oh, she might actually be thinking about this now.
Yeah, cool.
Because I think she's just looking for somebody to give her a pill that's going to take the pain away, and I just don't think that's there.
Yeah, which is understandable. I mean, we all want magic pills for stuff, don't we? That would make things easy. But we also, from my perspective, miss an incredible gift and opportunity if we do that. Because essentially all we're doing is suppressing again then.
You know, you said about the traits. Could they also be like being perfectionist and very sensitive?
Yeah.
Seeing that
For some reason, people that and they all cross over, right? But for some people with ME tend to be more centered around the perfectionism and the fear, like safety issues. But yeah, perfectionism is certainly always used to be an aspect of it. Yeah, and just like a lot of self-defeating stuff. You know, all of our cells have little nervous systems of their own, and whatever we think, our cells kind of hear or resonate with, like on an energetic level. We're sending a message to our body. And so the more negative our thoughts are, then the more of a toxifying effect that has on our body as well. And our little cells actually like listen and respond to us. And if we have a lot of like self-hatred thoughts, the cells die actually. You know, cells die off because we tell ourselves that we're rubbish and we're not worth anything. And our poor little cells are going, oh, we're rubbish, we're not worth anything, like, die now. So, yeah, it's that self-defeating stuff is a big thing. And it all ultimately just comes from, you know, we all want to feel safe, we all want to feel loved. We've all got these patterns. It just happens that we're connecting through our, association with that illness today. You know, we all have stuff to see. And yeah, more to experience all the time, I think. Always.
So would you say now, through your experience, that you're a better and more happier person for what you've been through? Because of what you've been through, and you don't suffer with fibromyalgia now.
And you know what? As I said, if I get a headache now, or if I get a pain in my back now, I know it's an instant kind of right, what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
And so I can just address it, act accordingly or whatever. Whereas before that, I'd kind of eventually amalgamated into this illness. And they're just labels, you know, really. Like, my experience is certainly not that fibromyalgia is like this entity, and chronic fatigue syndrome is like this entity, is this thing that you have. It's just, it's a label that that's given to a group of symptoms, which to me was really, really helpful to get that. It was so helpful to get a diagnosis because then I moved forward then, you know.
Yeah. Makes sense, doesn't it? It makes a lot, what you've said makes a lot of sense.
Cool.
It does.
Thank you very much, Linzi.
Thank you. Thank you.